Louisa was a huge fan of German female poet Bettina von Arnim. Some people say that Bettina was a fraud, a big-time con woman, and others say that she was an early feminist. When Louisa was a teenager, she read Bettina's book called Goethe's Correspondence with a Child, Goethe's Briefeschell mit einem Kinde in German. It is a collection of letters that Bettina wrote to the poet Goethe. Louisa was a teenager when she read this book. She had developed a crush on her next-door neighbor, philosopher Waldo Emerson, who was 29 years older than Louisa. Louisa writes in her journal, quote, "I turned myself into Bettina and made Emerson my Goethe. I would leave flowers to his doorstep and sing Mignon's song in bad German underneath his window." Isn't it interesting that Mignon's song pops up again in Jo's and Friedrich's relationship? There's a quote from Louisa where she writes, "I am a hero worshipper by nature." Louisa's father, Bronson Alcott, and Emerson were good friends, but Bronson wasn't always the most stable father figure. Emerson supported Louisa's interest in literature and also let her borrow books from his great library. It is not that much big a surprise that Louisa did develop a crush on him. Bettina was a very unusual woman, a very clever woman, and I think Louisa very much self-identified herself to her. Louisa was a huge fan of Sturm und Drang movement, which was a German movement in literature and arts that was started by Goethe, and it emphasized the emotional experiences of the individual. This is what Bettina wrote to her brother about herself, and it could apply to Louisa May Alcott as well. "It is no use telling me to be calm. To me that conveys sitting with my hands in my lap, looking forward to the bread we are having for supper. My soul is a passionate dancer. She dances to hidden music, which only I can hear. Whatever police the world may prescribe to rule the soul, I refuse to obey them." Bettina, whose actual name was Elisabeth Bretano, was born in Frankfurt in 1785 into a family of Italian merchants. Bettina had a very strange connection with Goethe. In her youth, her mother Maximilian had been Goethe's first lover and muse. Bettina's mother died when she was only 8 years old, and she was sent to a convent, but she considered Goethe as her family's property. During this time, Goethe had established a position in Germany as the national author and poet. Different to Louisa, Bettina has been described to be incredibly beautiful. Bettina was small and delicate with black blossoming curls, porcelain skin, luminous brown eyes, and magnetism beyond conventional beauty. This is a quote from Gundera's Immortality. She was 22, about the same age as Goethe, when he fell for her mother, Maximilian, back in his youthful Frankfurt days. This earlier infatuation with her mother may have led Bettina to imagine that she could be Goethe's daughter. The feeling grew in her. She had some sort of a secret right to the great poet, because in the metaphoric sense, and who should take metaphor seriously if not a poet, she considered herself as his daughter. In any case, she developed what might be called hero worship for the great man. She was a small person and played on being a childlike figure, like that of Mignon in Goethe's Wilhelm Meister novel. End quote. Hello friends, it is Niina from the Little Woman podcast. Just to let you all know that the Little Woman podcast episode transcripts are now available as books. You can find them as paperbacks and ebooks. They are wonderful reading for all the fans of Louisa May Alcott. You can find all the links from the description. And now, back to the show. Bettina wrote him an impressive amount of 52 letters. In Little Woman, Friedrich asked Jo if she could address him as du, because in the German language there are two ways to say you, du and sie. Du is the informal way to address another person, something you would say with your partner, and sie is the formal way. In Old English, du was translated to tu. Greta Gerwig has famously complained in every interview about how terrible it is that Friedrich forces Jo to call him tu. without doing any sort of research on what the word actually means. I don't know why Gerwig lies so much. In the book, Friedrich very respectfully and quite adorably asks her if she would like to address him with tu instead of you, and Louisa writes, quote, "Joe found tu a lovely syllable." Kundera continues, "In these 52 letters, Bettina addresses him with the familiar tu form." These letters were the basis of the book she published after Goethe's death, Goethe's correspondence with a child. It was not until the 1920s the authenticity of the correspondence was questioned, when the original letters were discovered and published. When I read Goethe's correspondence with a child, it is a very odd book. She writes to Goethe, but it's never about him. She speaks about their shared future, but never asks him what his thoughts are. It is very similar to Laurie's relationship with Joe. When he proposes, he doesn't ask what Joe wants. He says what he wants, and then there is a scene where Laurie is composing an opera, and it is a moment when you get this feeling that he doesn't care who he wants to marry. He imagines himself to be a prince who saves a helpless princess. Neither Joe or Amy are helpless by any means, so he doesn't see either Amy or Joe as the individuals they are. Laurie and Bettina are not in love with anyone. They are in love with the idea of love. But luckily for us readers, and him, Laurie manages to snap out of that. This is what Bettina's brother Clemens writes. Goethe asked what interested her. "Nothing interests me but you," she said. He invited her to make herself at home. She jumped into his lap, threw her arms around his neck, and went to sleep. Clemens reported that for 3 hours Bettina extolled Goethe, chastised him and revitalized him. "Don't forget, Goethe, how it was I who learned to love you," she wrote to him. "It was through his books. I have been jealous of those other women, and sometimes I have felt myself the subject of your poems, and why shouldn't I dream myself into happiness, where the higher reality is there than a dream?" Goethe was a ladies' man and was kind to Bettina at first, but as the time passed, she behaved more like a stalker, and Goethe only occasionally answered her letters. Bettina left her mark on the world's history. She was amused to Beethoven, and according to some sources, she attracted the attention of Napoleon. Her book, Goethe's Correspondence with a Child, became a bestseller. She married another poet, von Arnim, and had 7 children with him, and later on she became very active in German politics. A very interesting lady. She sounds a bit scary. The whole obsession with Goethe doesn't sound very healthy, but Louisa's love for Bettina and Goethe can be seen in her books, not only in Joe's and Friedrich's relationship, but also in Joe's and Laurie's relationship. Louisa did tell Emerson about her girlhood crush when she was an adult. They were very good friends, but he had no idea.